This podcast is part of the Game and Entertainment Network. Visit tgenetwork.net to find the latest episodes from all our shows.
It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Agronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belgast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again. Time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 178. Tonight, I'm joined by Ashgar, Tam,
hello,
and Kodra.
Greetings.
We're down at Thalen and down at Grace because reasons. And Kodra is traveling, so he's putting in the good fight to communicate on a different platform than he's used to communicating on.
It's true. I'm also communicating from a different time zone. Back to the old late night for me.
That I find it funny that like all of you transitioned from one extreme to the other extreme.
I mean, the other extreme is not really that extreme. I feel like a 7 p.m. start time is perfectly normal.
Yeah, it's a little bit later for me. And a lot later for Grace.
I'd like to point out that you asked us to move to 10 p.m. while you were still in East Coast time.
Did I?
You did.
That seems like something
true.
I would do, actually, because Gabri would have wanted me to be podcasting later. Gabri is my wife, podcast world.
So last week, we had a topic that ended up getting bumped for time, largely because it was way too big of a can of worms to open that late at night. And that has been the recent controversies over loot boxes and monetization in general through microtransactions and the such. And there's just been a lot of stuff in the news lately about this, and I feel like every time I turn around, someone is putting their take on the subject, and it felt weird that we hadn't really talked about it as of yet. I feel like we all kind of have differing opinions, or at least nuanced versions of opinions.
I feel like we all have slightly different nuanced opinions because this is a very complicated topic, but also pretty important, because without figuring out, maybe we don't have games no more, or at least we don't have nearly as many or as good of them.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a bigger question at work here is basically is like, how are we going to pay for games in the future? And what is happening currently is, at least in part, because we've done a poor job of paying for games up to this point, or at least paying for the actual value of the game, like what it costs to make the game.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can get on my behind the scenes soapbox here, where like, so a brand new game costs $60 in general, and like that's not a number that's changed in more than a decade now.
Launch of the PS,
Also the Xbox 360.
Yeah, 360, I guess.
I mean, to be fair, like that's not too far off from what they were when they were Super Nintendo games. Like I remember paying.
That's actually pretty far off from what they were
That's
when they were Super Nintendo games.
really far off,
That's
yeah.
cheaper than they were when they were Super Nintendo games,
Right.
for the most part.
Well, okay, so like I remember, especially with RPGs, like I paid somewhere close to $90 for Final Fantasy 3, aka
Yep.
Final Fantasy
Chrono
6.
Trigger was $85.
Yeah, like import cartridges.
Prices were not standardized during the PlayStation era either.
Yeah, and
It wasn't until PS2 that they fixed the price at $50.
Yeah, and that was a console. That was, I think, Sony making a move to say, this is what we are going to, our standard price for all of our games is going to be this.
Well, and I think some weird stuff happened when we switched from basing the price of games on what the actual physical storage media required versus everything is a CD and CDs are cheap to make. So I think that's when we really started to see the standardization on price, is because there wasn't a real clear reason why we were charging more for this game or more for that game. Because, you know, it didn't actually equate to, oh, well, no, this card itself, without a game on it, cost them, you know, $30 to make. And then now they're charging, you know, 50 on top of that for the game.
Well, we've never had a discussion in, like, games have followed the Hollywood model, and Hollywood movies, you don't pay different prices for a ticket, even if a movie cost more to make. And so the idea of, at no point in modern games history has there been the idea that you might pay more for a game because it's a more premium game. Like, that's sort of started to be a thing in reverse.
Yeah, I was gonna say we're going the opposite direction. Now, now you can get $15 game experiences, and those are the indie games.
Yeah, exactly. We've gone in the opposite direction where this game that is in some way below some bar, whatever that bar happens to be, whether it's fidelity or whatever, costs less than a brand new full price AAA game. But we've sort of staunchly avoided going in the opposite direction, where the idea of charging more than $60 for a game is insanity. And like, that's not viable for most games. I mean, it's why you see things like, Eidos was disappointed in the sales of Thief because it only sold like 2 million units and they needed it to sell 8. And like, selling 8 million units there's a handful of games ever that have sold that many. Like at a $60 price point, the number of copies of a game that you have to sell is just more than games will sell.
Well, and I think the problem as well is, like, as consumers, we have this weird concept of what things should cost. And I guess what I mean by that is... This concept
isn't based in reality in any way. Like,
no, well,
that's a conversation I've had a few times now.
So I'm not talking about, like, just games specifically. I'm talking about, like, stuff in the world. Usually when a product comes out, it costs a fixed amount of price to make, and through, improvements in production or technologies get cheaper, the price oftentimes gets pushed down. Like, so I'm trying to think of a good example of this.
This is true for like basically most tech, but I feel like it's not true in a lot of other domains.
So like when tech especially gets commoditized, DVD players, for example, that first year they were really popular, you were shelling out $300-$400 on a DVD player. And by the end of the run, you could go pretty much anywhere and pick up, a $10 DVD player that would play anything that any other DVD player would play. And unfortunately, like, that's kind of the mindset I think a lot of people have, is like, oh, so these things should be cheap because, we've been doing this forever. But the cost of making games keeps going up instead of going down. Like, the fidelity that we expect as gamers just costs more money. Like, it requires more people hours to generate. Like, there's an image floating around, and it was like, I'm trying to think which two characters were being compared, but it was like...
It was Cloud and Titus.
Yeah, Cloud and Titus, which Titus is a low detail character compared to what we're seeing now. But, like, you can definitely see, like, it would take less time to create Cloud than it does to create Titus. Now, turn around, like, Aloy. Aloy is a super detailed character model. Like, it took a lot of time to create Aloy.
I am curious, is this, like, on the human scale, this whole expectation that things get cheaper, is that a new phenomenon because of the price cycle of tech?
No, it's an Industrial Revolution thing.
It's Industrial Revolution. Yeah. I'm just like, is this a new human behavior we really haven't grappled with and figured out yet?
I mean, yeah.
We have this expectation of mass production lowers price.
Well, that's because we've been trained to by mass production lowering price. But it means that, what it means is that we greatly devalue creative output.
Yeah, and I think that's evident. I mean, talk to any freelance or any artist, and they'll tell you, like, it is virtually impossible to put a dollar value on creative output such that your average person will not say that's ridiculous. What
was the target of this week? People die of exposure.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, can't you just do this for exposure? No, you really can't.
Well, and it's like, okay, the one that I always think of is like minis painting is a great example. It's like, okay, what does it cost to paint a mini? Like, all right, I paint a mini. I paint fairly quickly. Call it 2 to 4 hours on a mini. What does that cost? Like at $10 an hour, you're looking at $20 to $40 for one mini. That's like for most cases, that's like sometimes half again the price at least of the mini, if not 2 or 3 times the cost of the mini itself. And like at $10, am I going to paint a mini for $10 an hour? Like, no, I'm probably not. It's not really worth my time at that point. So that's like a low bar. But when you sit there and you tell somebody like, yeah, I'll paint that mini for you for $40, they're like, that much? Like, that's crazy. Well, I mean, that's a really basic cost to effort. Unless you're like a professional minis painting business that has a bunch of equipment that lets you do it much faster and much more efficiently.
I mean, so a prime example is like when I commission somebody to do art for me, like it's usually a drawing of Belle. That's somewhere in the range of $60 usually. And I feel like maybe I'm not paying enough at that point, because I generally try and think of things in terms of like, how much time would this take me to make? Like, and what would I pay to avoid having to do that thing? And usually it's a lot of money that I would pay to avoid doing that thing.
And I think it gets even more blurry when you look at something like video games. Because like I know people who in absolute seriousness will say, why would I pay $60 to play Horizon when I could play Undertale for 10 or 15?
And what kills me is that the industry is this entity that is killing its employees. Like these creative workers are in some terrible like work-life balance situations because we are like the gaming culture is demanding this level of fidelity.
I mean, to hit the level of fidelity and to hit the number of hours of top tier content that your game has to have in the budget that you'll have for it, something has to give. Either the budget has to go up, or the amount of time you have to make it has to go up, which is really functionally equivalent to your budget going up, or the amount of money you expect to get from it has to go up.
So, is this a case where we haven't seen somebody explicitly say this game at the entry level for this game, which is the only level for this game, by the way, is $90, is because market forces would kill that game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, like, is that because people would just not buy that game out of spite, or is there some actual supply and demand issue here?
Unless that game is Call of Duty, and like I do mean actual Call of Duty, nobody is going to buy that game.
I think more to dive a little bit deeper on that one, any game that could justify a $90 price tag is not worth the risk of the uncertainty of whether the $90 price tag will kill it or not.
Like, this is if all games, like if there was collusion in the industry and everyone was like, all of these AAA games are now $90 games, do you think the market would bear that?
I think
it could.
I think the answer is yes, but they would change what the market looks like. I think
would that make this? And this is the thing. Like, would people be turned off of games enough that it wouldn't make as much money? Like, is $60 actually the right price? And this is a problem because we have hit a bubble. Or is $60 not actually the right price for the market?
I mean, I think that assumes that the market is a unmanipulable thing. Like, I think that assumes that the market is a force that is immutable and doesn't change and has complete control, which I don't think is true.
Yeah.
Because I think that you could say, hey, you could have a well-respected studio and publisher, etc., a supply chain that says we are committed to only premium content. We are only going to release games when we think that they are worth $90, and that is what we are going to charge for our games. We will deliver a high quality, high fidelity experience every single time. But in order to do that, in order to be in that situation, you need a whole ton of seed money to survive until you can get that engine going. And nobody has that, or a small number of studios has it. Blizzard could probably get away with it if Blizzard wanted to do that.
I mean,
Blizzard has found other ways of funding their games.
Exactly.
Which we're going to get to. Valve would be an interesting people to do it
Valve
if they ever decided
games.
they wanted to make games.
Yeah, like
that's actually not true. Valve doesn't make games like that anymore.
Yeah.
They used to.
They used to, but I think they stopped because they quite possibly saw where the industry was headed.
Speaking of where there is so much news there's so much news relevant to this in the industry. Like, did you guys see the article about, the EA shuttering Visceral and saying we're only going to do games that have multiplayer now? Like, that's that thing too.
That is some spin on their actual
we don't want to do high quality single player experiences anymore.
Yeah, well, EA is a company that only does one thing, and that one thing is very risky and very failure prone, and is not a stable. It's why EA falls on its face trying to put out and shutters a top tier Star Wars game, and Sony can bankroll a brand new, never before seen IP and have it do amazingly.
What do you mean by that?
So
that EA only does one thing.
EA only makes video games.
Yes.
The only thing EA does is make video games. And video games are super unstable and unreliable and a risky source of income. Because who knew that Assassin's Creed Revelations was going to bomb? That's a super well-loved series. Why would it bomb? Well, for reasons that are very, very difficult to predict, and similar. And that's why the industry is so risk averse. Because if you try to get somebody to give you, $100 million because you're pretty sure it's going to do great, like, that's about what you're working with.
Well, and the social media climate around games is not helping. Like, I absolutely feel like Andromeda was killed by bad reviews, because the game within a few days of launch fixed the majority of the glaring problems.
But it launched with some glaring problems. And it became the brunt of so many jokes. And that was all that mattered at that point. And, like, there are people, I will tell people, I love this game. And they're like, oh, I heard it was horrible. Like, I didn't look at it because, everyone told me it was horrible. And, I thought it was one of the best Mass Effect games I'd played. But the review cycle, and more than just the review cycle, the Twitch and YouTube cycle focused on nothing but the bugs, and went to great extents to reproduce the bugs just to make funny content for their viewers.
Which is super easy to do and super lucrative if you're in the YouTube Twitch sector.
Yep.
There's a reason why quote-unquote angry YouTubers do so well, is because people love bashing things.
That's a whole other rant that I won't get into.
But, like, I feel like all of these things are hitting at the same time and are making it extremely difficult for any company to make any money.
Well, I think all of them have been building for a really long time too. Like, none of this is coming out of the blue.
Well, so we expect so much churn in the news cycle that people are under a magnifying glass from the second there's even a hint that there's a game coming out. Because, like, every month there's another show that people are expecting content to come from. It used to just be the CES, and now we have a bajillion little shows. And even more than that, like when I was in high school, you got a magazine once a month, and that was where you got your news. Like, the majority of the news I got was from EGM. and that was a once a month feed of information. Now it's a daily feed.
Hourly.
I feel like that's
Hourly
going into a
feed.
slightly different discussion that I could maybe go on with for a while.
I'm just saying, like, all of these things complicate the situation of how games are made and how they are financed and funded and how they actually turn a profit.
But I think, and I think that you've got this highly cutthroat, highly competitive market. There are so many games coming out like every day or every week that you really need. It becomes even more expensive and thus even more risky just to get any signal through all the noise if you want to make sure that people know that your game exists. And then it's like, okay, we can't charge more, even though our production values are going up and up and up, and our marketing and our need to spend money on marketing is going up and up and up. We're not actually charging any more for these games because that would be like market suicide. So the question is, how do you fund games? And I feel like we've thrashed through a whole bunch of different attempts to figure out how to bridge the gap between what can be charged for a game and what needs to be to make the system stable. And like, I feel like we've exhausted most of the good ones, and now we're into the crappy ones, because there's some crappy ones that are really successful, like loot boxes.
So okay, games need to cost more than $60. The first attempt at fixing this was EA's Online Pass, which did not really cause games to cost more than $60 unless you bought them used, in which case they cost you $10 more. They dropped this because it didn't work.
Yeah.
The one that has some basis in economics is the Digital Deluxe Edition, which usually costs $80 or $90.
How convenient. Well, and I guess that there's a slight parallel going on here in that I think a lot of early attempts like EA's Project $10 were a kind of not complete understanding as to why games weren't selling enough to make up their costs because in large part, GameStop did not help this any.
GameStop is now currently in the business of selling a lot more than games.
Yes.
Because I think they realize that they need to find something else to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and what would happen was a game would come out and people would wait a week and buy it used for, even $5 off or whatever, get it cheaper used. But those games sold used don't make money at all.
Money for GameStop, but not for the publisher or developer.
Yep.
I mean, I knew a lot of people that they would buy a brand new game and they would run home and play it non-stop so that they could run it right back to GameStop and get the maximum amount when they bought it back. And that was basically how they did all their gaming. Like they would get it on day one, play it super quick, sell it back to GameStop at a massive cut, but more than they would have gotten if they waited a week, and then moved on to the next thing. And then that linked up with the people that were wanting to wait a week to play and basically were supplying the demand. I'm not really sure when the loot box thing started though.
Started in Asia.
It's very popular with Asian MMOs and got to some MMOs here as well.
Yep. It is a Korean MMO construct that really took off. I think it appeared in some other things, but it took hold there.
I guess what I mean is like it has been in the MMO sphere so long that I'm just used to it, and I don't even remember when it really started. Like when it started first appearing in games that were in my radar.
Its current popularity can mostly be laid at the feet of Overwatch.
Yeah, I mean, I think the waters got tested in games like in MMOs.
But I know like Call of Duty had it long before Overwatch launched. And I know, doesn't CSGO have some kind of a loot box functionality, and that's how people get their skins?
Might be.
CSGO and TF2 have also, yes, very heavily gone into the whole loot box thing. I'd actually completely forgotten about TF2, and it's
hats.
More than that, but yeah.
I know the TF2 hat thing existed around the time Rift launched because I have like items that came from the launch of Rift that are like a mace that I can use in TF2 and like some kind of special hat. I mean, I feel like one of the first implementations that I like actually really paid attention to was probably Guild Wars 2's Black Lion chests.
I don't know. I think of Tor, SWTOR.
SWTOR is definitely my first major run-in with loot boxes in an MMO.
But I guess I played a whole bunch of Korean MMOs a few years ago, so I also kind of saw that.
Technically, like the first one I ever saw it in probably was it was like a straight WoW clone, something
Runes of
Magic. Yeah, and everything had loot boxes and like timed buffs that you had, but anyway, like these have basically been around in the MMO world for a very, very long time, to the point where like you mostly just ignore the fact that you just got a loot box and you delete it instead of caring about it. Or, you know, like in Guild Wars 2, I just keep selling them back to the market for a few copper.
The loot boxes in Guild Wars 2 are kind of laughable to me because I have no idea like how they ever justify their value.
Guild Wars 2 is a weird case because the loot boxes are such a blatantly bad idea that I don't care about them.
Well, yeah. And the problem with it, like, so there's really cool stuff that can come out of those loot boxes, but it is so laughably rare that it's never a good idea to actually do this thing.
Does it have good stuff in it? I have certainly been given a lot of free loot boxes that are supposed to entice me to buy more loot boxes, and I have never once been even remotely enticed to buy more loot boxes.
Yeah.
Okay, so like all of those expendable items that you can get from Guild Wars 2 Black Lion chests, and that you get from your monthly Black Lion gift from logging in, there is a unlimited version of every single one of them. So like there's an unlimited use repair tool, there's an unlimited use bank, there's an unlimited use market board. So those are actually kind of useful, like, and that's how you get all the weird mining nodes and crafting nodes that you can have in your home instance. So, like, I would love to have an Orichalcum node in my home instance that I could just go hit once a day and know I'm getting a steady influx of that metal. But it is so ridiculously rare that you can't ever reason that you're going to get this thing. Like, if you get it, you probably should sell it because it's so much money.
That is what I did with the one I picked up randomly.
Because you got the Mystic Forge one, didn't you?
That actually used. That wasn't worth nearly as much when I got it as it is now. I got the not account-bound one, sold that, and bought the account-bound one and still had like 150 gold left over. But also I got the permanent hardwood node or something.
Yeah.
And I sold that and bought the precursor I liked the most. And again, still had a few hundred gold left over. But like Black Lion keys are a terrible value because even if people have run the numbers on what buying Black Lion keys gets you. And for the most part, it gets you less than buying gold wood.
Yeah.
Even if you get some chase items and sell them.
And like to combat this, people have this key farming thing that they do once a week where they create a brand new character and run it up to the point where you get your first free keys, or actually first free key singular, and then delete that character and then start again next week.
Wow, I guess,
like there's a whole meta around it because like there's some various gear that is not bind to character that they keep around, so they basically just outfit the character and burn it up real quick and then focus on the story and then get their key and then kill that character.
That seems like a meta that ArenaNet would really not want to have spring up.
That's why you can only do it once a week.
Yep, you can do it once a week. And like the people that are really good at this, I've watched a video, they do it in 10 minutes. Get from brand new character to Black Lion key, which I think is either level 10 or level 15.
It's the level 10 story.
Yeah, like you could do it real quick. I feel like that's not even worth 10 minutes of my time.
No. Like I did it one week and I'm like, no, this is nonsense because really, like, you're not going to get anything useful. Because, like, here, the thing with Black Lion chests is just by logging in and playing, you get those Black Lion goods chests, and they can drop every single thing that can come out of a Black Lion's chest.
That's not true. They can only drop the consumable versions.
Oh, I thought they could also
No,
drop like the nodes and stuff.
They're not that nice. No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I had understood that you could also get the nodes out of them.
So on loot boxes in general, I've always sort of had a weird view of them because I play lots of CCGs and my brain thinks of them like packs of cards.
Yes.
And I also mostly think that packs of cards are a terrible value unless they are being used to enhance the play experience.
I, on the other hand, love cracking packs. So, like, probably of us, I am the most likely to be susceptible to loot boxes.
That's
because
probably not true.
I enjoy them.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's true.
Really?
I don't play SWTOR anymore because I have had enough of that game. I spent entirely too much money chasing an item in the stupid Cantina crates. And now I don't even want to log into that game ever.
I mean, I did my fair share of chasing in that game going after Revan armor, so I understand.
There is a value point where there's a point at which I feel like I am okay with loot boxes, but it doesn't come up very often. I play a lot of Fire Emblem Heroes, and I feel like I do spend some amount of money, and occasionally, if something really interesting comes up, I'll chase something interesting in that game. But every loot box I open in that game gives me 100% useful value, even if it's not the value I want. And I think that's interesting, but like it's one of the only loot boxes, because I think Kodra and Ash saw my multiple years Magic card collection and how much total garbage there was in it. I don't get lucky draws. That's happened to me once ever. And so from that perspective, nothing out of a random pack ever feels worthwhile.
Yeah, and I have probably unnatural luck, so I mean I can go buy 2 packs of cards at the store and both pull mythics from them. So I guess the problem with that though is like it's giving me an unrealistic expectation that like there might be something useful, because a lot of times there is.
So one of the things in games that bothers me is a lot of the loot box economies like explicitly refuse to have a secondary market. And the way I like to interact with loot box economies is entirely from a perspective of the secondary market, because I don't like purchasing just random stuff. That's something that deeply offends me.
Yeah, I hate trying to chase random stuff.
But I do feel like I would not like what I like a lot about Warframe is that at any point I could go in and I could plop down some money and get some platinum, and I could go on to the secondary market and buy whatever I wanted.
Yeah.
And I think that is important for loot box economies, for me to not immediately check out from them. See also why I still interact with the Guild Wars 2 economy.
Yeah.
Like, Guild Wars 2 is a game where I will put money in to get gems, because I can convert those gems to gold and convert that gold into exactly what I wanted to get.
I mean, to be fair, like, SWTOR had a decent implementation of a third-party market when it comes to loot box stuff.
No, because in SWTOR, if you wanted a chase item from a cartel crate, chances are pretty good you were going to have to go to the cartel crate, because there was no way to spend money for the thing you wanted other than the cartel crate.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, all those things became sellable on the auction house.
But I couldn't spend money for credits, could I?
Yeah, you can't. The
I guess that's true.
The amount of credits income you needed was more so ridiculous.
Like, the item in question here was the Act Dog. That was going for more on the market than my character had ever earned.
By like an order of magnitude, as I recall.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
And like, I think that we have this, there's this deeply embedded like fear and hatred of the idea of pay to win. But like, time is money, frankly. If you don't have the time to play for the, in some cases, insane number of hours you would need to make the credits to buy that thing, there's no reason. Like, I don't have an issue with pay some money and get what you want. Like, I think I used to, but But I think that came from a place where games did not demand that much skill. They just demanded time.
Okay, so here's a counter to that, which is I agree. Spending money to reduce time investment, I think that's fine. But games like, specifically, I think World of Tanks has run into some problems where there are items that you can only earn by spending real money that are just better than everything else.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing done poorly.
Yeah, like that's where I'm like, that's pay to win, and the only one winning is the people paying. Like, you can't work to get that.
But like, as an example, I think that the fact that you can buy a legendary in Guild Wars 2 off of the market board is good. It is a good piece of design.
100% agree.
Because and it's a multi-layered thing, because it's like somebody had to put that work in game to create that item. If they decide to then give themselves gold for life, basically, or gold for the foreseeable future by taking that effort and taking their time and turning it into money, I'm 100% okay with that. And if somebody else who can't or for entirely reasonable reasons does not want to invest that time into creating that object themselves, they can acquire. They can they're not locked out of it forever. Like, it makes me think of we were talking last week about the Final Fantasy housing thing. I am in the luxurious position of, I can tell my work I'm going to be a bit late because I'm going to stay up late doing a thing. And I can stay up late, wake up, be online on my fast internet connection to nab us a house at 3 a.m. But like, it's, I mean, as we discussed on last week's show, like, that's dumb. That's somebody who doesn't have that same luxury as I do simply can't have a house. Like, they just can't. That's not an option for them. And that sucks. And similarly, like, there's some games that I would love to play with people, but the amount of time that it would take them to catch up to where I'm at is enough that they'll just never do it, because it's too much time. There are enough good games out that I don't have the same like zealotry towards put your time in as I once did. And to the point where I'm sort of frustrated when a game doesn't let me, in some form, say, okay, let me bypass this grind with dollars. Because if I like the game that much, I'm willing to pay a little bit more because it's earned, that money from me. And I simply don't have the time. And it makes me think of like one of the reasons that I sort of check out of Final Fantasy sometimes for a while is because the amount of time it asks me to play on a daily basis is more than I'm willing to commit to it. Like, if I wanted to stay current in that game, I would need to play something like 5 to 6 hours a week spread across 4 or 5 days. And I just don't want to do that. Like, I don't have that. I neither have that kind of free time to spend on that game, nor am I interested in devoting that much of myself to that one game.
I think another point here is that there are so many games, and it used to be that I was devoted to World of Warcraft, and I would put in ridiculous grinds because that was how you played World of Warcraft. I don't have a game that I want to ever play like World of Warcraft ever again. Like, I don't have the time to play all of the games as much as I used to play World of Warcraft.
I feel like there's a lot of people that just have a ethical complaint with the concept of microtransactions in general.
I don't have an ethical complaint with the concept of microtransactions in general. I do have an ethical complaint about some of the limitations, which are absolutely predatory.
Yes.
Speaking of potentially really predatory microtransactions, also in the news this week was Activision patenting a system that would utilize matchmaking to encourage for the purposes of encouraging microtransactions, with the stated concept of, if they could identify somebody who was thinking about purchasing a microtransaction, pairing that player with a top-tier player who uses that item. so that they could see how good it is in the hands of a very high-level player and encourage them to ultimately buy that item. And, like, I know that was definitely, that was the one people were talking about. And offline, I thought you actually pointed out a even more, like, on the surface, benign example, but still really kind of ethically murky, which is matchmaking somebody into a match where they will shine because of their purchase.
Yeah,
that was also part of the patent.
Yeah, that was also part of the patent, and like that's one that I feel real. I have complicated feelings about, but like I also feel like that patent is kind of a lot of much ado about nothing. In that, like, yes, it is extremely questionable at an ethical level. It reads as super predatory. It's a kind of thing that I feel like a much better solution is for every item on the shop, there's a try a match with this button. So you can try before you buy, which would incidentally provide more useful data to the developer side, because you could see like, oh, hey, tons of people try this and almost no one buys it. That must mean it doesn't feel good. Why? And like spurring you to be interested in microtransactions by letting you try things that are more than cosmetic before buying them seems like a really strong way to, drive sales of those items. And it's surprising me that we don't see more of that, although I bet it's a lot of gun shyness about demos.
Well, so like if I remember correctly, in Heroes of the Storm, I think they have a try champion option.
Yeah.
You can't try it in a match, but you can see what all their abilities do,
right.
See what their level up options are, try their different ults.
Yeah, it's
enough to get a feel for how the character might play.
Exactly. And honestly, I don't even play that much Heroes of the Storm, but messing around with that has driven a couple of purchases.
Heroes of the Storm, however, decided that you shouldn't be allowed to buy skins anymore.
The what?
Heroes of the Storm, however, has decided that skins are not something you can buy anymore.
Yes, they're all loot box.
Well, I guess I'm checked out of buying cosmetics in that game ever. Not that I was playing a whole lot of that game. But yeah, the idea of... Anyway, the reason I feel like the whole like predatory Activision matchmaking thing is you're just not going to have that many people playing any given game. There aren't enough people playing a game, any game. That pool of people is not large enough for you to reasonably be able to do that for any length of time.
Well, and it's so transitory. Like the crush of a game lasts for maybe 2 weeks before the big numbers move on to something else.
Yep. Like you might be able to run that algorithm in a game like Call of Duty for 2, maybe 3 weeks. And that's it. Like, I mean, you already have the problem. It reminds me of the problem we had playing Tribes, where we were really into it, and as we played longer and the overall population of the game dropped, the only people that were still playing were people that stomped our faces in.
Yeah.
And so we stopped playing because we stopped having even matches. And that exacerbating that problem. Because like when we left, whoever would have been evenly matched with us had a smaller pool of people that they could play against. And like in aggregate, you get to a point where you just don't, your matchmaking is going to struggle to give you a fun match, much less a fun match that's optimized to try to sell you an item. Because frankly, if you feel useless and terrible in a match full of super high tier players, you don't care that one of the super high tier players has the awesome sniper rifle you were thinking of buying.
Yeah, you're just frustrated with the game.
Yeah, you're just frustrated with the game. And if you buy that fancy new sniper rifle and then get put in a match that's ostensibly trying to showcase how good it was, and you lose knowing that you were in a match where you should have excelled, then you quit.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where the more numbers of people you need for a match to actually work, the harder it is. Tribes was definitely hard because that was like 8v8.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this is absolutely the reason why Destiny 1 was 6v6 and Destiny 2 is 4v4.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to tighten down the skills, ceilings, and floors.
Well, and make it faster to find a match. It is way easier to match 8 players together than to match 12 players together.
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, even StarCraft, which is 1v1, has issues with... It's like StarCraft, arguably the most popular 1v1 competitive multiplayer game, has issues with matching people to the right skill level.
I mean, I feel like there's a problem with matching in general when there's just a great prevalence of people creating Smurf accounts in regardless of what game it is.
Well, yeah, and that's the other, like, Smurf accounts are a silly name, which I've never quite figured out. But anyway.
I got no clue.
Goes back to Warcraft 3 and 2 famous players who did it. Named Papa Smurf and Smurfette on their new accounts.
Got it. All right, gaming history. Now I know. But the thing with the Smurf accounts is it is a way of elongating that I am only playing in matches where I'm poorly match-made against people who are better than me because my ranking is too high, and there's this big gulf between my bubble of skill level and, you know, people to play against. And so I restart from 0 because my restarting from 0 is less. I am not giving up enough to be dissuaded from doing that compared to the unfun experience as I'm having in my supposedly mature account.
Well, and the problem is, like, you know, this happened to me over Iron Banner. I am by no means a top echelon player, but I did manage to bump my way up into, like, there really aren't real brackets, but, you know, there are theorized brackets that people have made guesses on, and I got bumped up into the platinum bracket, and the matches became way less fun because they were constantly, like, we were so evenly matched that, like, there was never a moment where you could just chill and enjoy the experience. It was all about what they call super sweaty matches, where everything is by a margin, like. And
that's generally the goal of a matchmaking system, is to get you in those matches more often.
Right, but they're not that fun.
Well, and
like they're fun for a period of time, but you can't play that many of them in a row.
Well, and there's no variation.
It takes too much out of you.
It's like it's like if you listen to MMO bass pop specialists, they'll say, look, like, you want places where there's more enemies. You want places that have so many enemies that you've really got to work to make it through, and you want some where there's almost nothing that you can just blaze through without thinking of it. Like, you need that variance. And I feel like that's one of those things that matchmaking games, like, every so often in a matchmaking system, you should get paired up in a game that will crush you, and then in a reasonable amount of time after, you should get paired up in a game where you dominate, and just to vary it up for everyone involved. But, like, you need so many people to make sure you repeatedly do that.
I mean, like, I guess for me, probably my ideal situation is if you could pair people to where they had, like, 2 somewhat inexperienced players and 2 very seasoned players on every team. That way there's a little bit of variance in what's going to happen in every match.
I feel like League of Legends has trained me to be horrified by that suggestion.
By the way, I really like League of Legends' kind of solution to try before you buy their free champion rotation. Like, you can always try some stuff that you don't own. Well, possibly don't own.
You're probably going to own them very quickly because they are the cheapest ones. You're probably going to own most of them fairly quickly because they are the cheapest ones.
The free champion rotation?
Well, it's referring to I guess, I'm sorry, League doesn't have the concept of permanently free champions.
No.
Nope.
Just that list of champions that are free way more often.
Yeah, but every champion gets rotated in eventually. Even the new ones. Which
is cool.
Yeah, it's a great way to drive sales for them, because I get to know whether or not I think I can play this character even remotely decently.
And then with League, didn't they usually rotate them in about 2-3 weeks after they are initially released?
I think the first time a champion would show up in the free rotation was, 3 weeks after their release usually. It was a fairly predictable amount of time. I just don't remember what that time was right now.
But it was enough time for the people that were absolutely going to buy the champion the second it got released to have bought it, and then to hook some additional people by letting them play it. I don't know. Like, I feel like we've reached this point where people just want something that can't exist anymore. And what I mean by that is a quote-unquote relatively cheap game that you pay for up front and never pay again. And I'm not sure if the funding model really allows for that, unless it's a weird indie edge case.
People are fundamentally misremembering, because people are not taking into account the fact that inflation exists. $60 price point for games is cheaper than it ever has been in games history, because it's never gone up and inflation has.
Yeah, I mean, when we say a game should cost $90 today, that's based on, in 2004, when games were set at their $60 price point and haven't moved, $60 in 2004 is $90 today.
So instead of charging $90, game companies are going to keep trying to find, honestly, worse and worse ways to get $90 out of a game sale.
I mean, so I just ran it through an inflation calculator.
$79.96 if you want to be very precise about it.
Well, no, like I was putting in the Chrono Trigger, which was $85 at launch in 1995, and it would be $139.58 right now. Like, if you're just adjusting.
Yeah, can you imagine paying $139.58 for Chrono Trigger?
With those graphics? Are you kidding me?
Right? I mean, can you imagine paying $139.58 for Final Fantasy 15?
But this is also why $150 collector's editions exist.
Yep.
Is to help get that price tag up a little bit more so that they're not losing as much on the game.
Yeah.
And, I mean, to some extent, like, yeah, it sucks a little bit, because you're usually financing your game on the backs of your most diehard fans, but they're also the ones that are willing to pay for it.
And it was like,
this is why I have a stupid statue of Xenos in my room right now that I have not even opened because of the stupid statue.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, and we went through a bunch of different, we tried to do the pay for DLC, but like DLC purchases drop off exponentially as after the first like week or two.
Well, and DLC's now a dirty word. Like, this is back to Bell's games media thing, but like, people just lump all of these monetization practices in with, this is like anti-consumer stuff that the evil producers are putting on us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a time not long ago when the value that people felt like they were getting out of the price of their games was not matching the price being poured into making them.
Well, and another problem with DLC in general is, especially like in a narrative game, it feels really weird to go back to the game after having not played it for a while and then to go find the thing that's been added to the world to trigger the adventure that got shimmed in somewhere. Like, sometimes it's really good, sometimes it's not very good at all, and sometimes, like, it basically would require you to start a brand new game to experience it, and if you've just finished a 60-hour campaign, you're not really apt to, 3 months in, start a brand new 60-hour campaign.
Especially because you may not remember, I mean, unless you're Kodra, probably don't remember everything that happened.
Right.
That's it. I mean, some of the best storytelling in video games in a really long time for me came from DLC.
Yeah.
Borderlands 2, the dungeon DLC.
Borderlands 2
Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep.
Yeah, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon's Keep was great. I think Mass Effect had at least 50% excellent DLC.
Oh, yeah.
All of 3's DLC is great.
Yeah.
and most of ME2's DLC.
Yeah.
The other side effect of this, though, is like, especially with a franchise that's notorious for a lot of DLC, like Fallout,
You don't buy it.
I have friends that will not buy it until the Game of the Year edition comes out.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
They just won't play it at all until they know they're getting all of it together at once.
And
Which
at that
is
point, it's too late.
because then you don't get a game.
Yep. Because then you don't get it. Yeah, absolutely. Because the window in which in which a game's sales matter is the first 2 weeks. Beyond the first 2 weeks, decisions are already being made about whether or not that game is worth continuing to spend development money on.
I do want to say, like, this isn't like on any individual in some ways, because like everyone's just doing what's in their best interest. The problem is that ultimately it feels like we're heading towards crash really hard.
Yep. Yeah.
And like we need to somehow figure out as like a culture and an industry how we solve this, because we have said for a while that 2017 is kind of incredibly oversaturated with just amazing games. And in the context of this conversation, that's really ominous.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of really good games that are not getting enough return on their investment.
Yeah.
And why make good games if they aren't going to make money?
Yep. And that's why I make the comment. It was like, in the early 80s, there were way more games coming out than anybody wanted to play, and most people weren't, and a large number of people did not feel like they were getting their values worth buying them new. And like different games, and like some of them were buggy and the quality was poor, like, you know, landfills full of ET, but that still led to the entire industry crashing. And I don't know what that looks like. You know, I see people lamenting the idea that nobody wants to make, you know, high production value single player games when they're some of the most beloved games out there. But like, beloved does not mean financially solvent. People loved. I mean, I was going to try to pick a game to describe, but there's so many of them that people loved. LA Noire. That game got incredible reviews. Everyone I knew who played it thought it was great. And it didn't sell enough to keep the studio open within like 2 months.
The same is true with Hollywood as well. Like, there are a lot of quote unquote cult classics that caused people to go bankrupt.
Well, and the difference with Hollywood, and I think the thing that makes the big difference between Hollywood and video games is, in Hollywood, all of the studios are in the same place, and everyone has an agent, and all of your work is project work. So if you're an actor, or if you're working in Hollywood in almost any capacity, you are either part of a union or you're an independent person with an agent who doesn't have to move to take a new job because all of the studios are in Hollywood. Right.
And your insurance is through the Screen Actors Guild instead of through a individual production company.
Yes, through the Screen Actors Guild, not Paramount Pictures. And it's why you see, whenever you see, like, Georgia has been doing this big like TV and filmmaking thing lately. And it's why they like emblazon that on everything, even remotely, where like any part of it was even remotely made in Georgia, because they need to advertise that, yes, development does happen outside of Hollywood. But like, game studios are all over the place. So when your project is finished, if it didn't sell well, now you've got to uproot your whole life and move across the country. Unless you're living in one of the few places where there are a bunch of game studios, in which case your window for finding a new job is even shorter because those places are really expensive.
Yeah. I
mean, it's small wonder that the average game industry career lifespan is 5 years. And then people leave and don't come back. It's like, what a shocker that all of our games feel like they're being made by people in their early 20s at most, because they are.
And by people who have never done this before.
Yep.
I mean, the entrenched studios that can support themselves are really not that many. like, or at least not like there used to be. And a lot of those, entrenched names are no more, or are just an imprint.
There's fewer and fewer of them because the bar to be able to be that is higher and higher constantly. I mean, even Blizzard sold to Activision. Valve doesn't make games anymore. What other big ones are there?
I mean, and sad as it sounds, like BioWare has greatly diluted because of the ownership of EA.
Yeah, like BioWare,
like it is a totally different studio now.
Yeah, BioWare was once one of those games, one of those studios, and they have. I mean, they first had to sell to EA, and that's not been. I mean, it's been great in that they've gotten games out, and they've probably kept on going longer than they otherwise could have, but it's taking its toll.
I mean, I guess I would argue Bethesda in this case.
I feel like Bethesda is the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, no,
it
I
is.
agree.
Like, they're a weird outlier.
It's worth noting that one of the things that makes Bethesda different from almost every other game publisher?
They are privately owned.
Yup.
Oh, interesting.
Bethesda Softworks is privately owned. ZeniMax Media is privately owned. It is not a publicly traded company. You cannot buy stock in ZeniMax.
I mean, I feel like IPO fever in general is a bad thing for a lot of industries.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it is not a good idea.
But if you've ever wondered why Bethesda can do pretty much whatever it wants on whatever schedule it feels like, that's why.
I was going to say, I have no idea why Wolfenstein 2 is coming out. Like, based on this whole conversation, Wolfenstein 1, it was a wonderful game. I love it deeply. It did not get the push it needed at launch, and it did not really move the units it needed to.
Say what you like about Bethesda. They are able to invest in studios and give them the time they need to flourish. They did it with Arcane. They did it with ZeniMax Online. They did it, and they're doing it with Machine Games.
They're playing a long game.
They're playing a long game because they can afford
a
to.
single year game.
Yep. And they know that it takes a few games to come into your own because they almost went bankrupt. Like people talk about how much they like Arena and Daggerfall, but like that company was going to go out of business and then they released Morrowind. And since all of the same people are still working there, they remember.
That's definitely another thing.
Yeah.
They're one of the last holdouts of it's ready when it's ready.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Blizzard was the same way, and I don't feel like Blizzard's that way anymore.
Nope. Well, Blizzard has other people to answer to.
But back to what I was saying, like when you had a monthly tick instead of an hourly tick on the news cycle, like it's ready when it's ready probably made a lot more sense because like you could still keep hyping it up in the magazine like a little drip of information once a month.
Yeah.
Like even if it's just a side note in a column. Like, and that was enough to keep people interested. But when you're needing that hourly news, like, and I guess the thing that frustrates me the most is like I don't agree with it, but like it's the reality. Like this is how things are right now.
Well, and so yeah, this has led to the hype cycle, right? Where people have figured out exactly how to engineer the perfect marketing campaign and why leaks are so dangerous now. Because everyone knows the perfect cycle upon which to tease and announce the announcement, and like all of the silly stuff you see in the games industry happens because marketing has figured out this is the best way to do it. And I don't remember if it was this week or last, the whole the industry is an industry of lies from Jim Sterling, where he basically is like, hey, like games companies lie constantly, and it's like, well, they know that the only way their game is going to succeed is if they control the advertising narrative throughout the entire thing. So that's why they lie, because like otherwise they think they're going to fail. And I don't know if they're wrong.
There are absolutely games whose failure in the market or ability to release at all was influenced totally by leaks.
So
the only case, the fact that we are in this constant news cycle where most of the games journalism coming out is being released specifically by the publishers. They're using that for their marketing campaigns, and when journalists actually release leaks or information that they have obtained independently that's disrupting the campaigns, that's when we get into messes.
Yeah, there's this desire for relevance. There's this desire for relevance on the reporting side, so that you're more than just, because any self-respecting journalist wants to be more than a mouthpiece for a marketing company. Like, I get that.
Well, and the problem is that, okay, so, like, I have been to enough press events at this point that I have now ended up on mailing lists where I get press releases for a lot of different things. And so often you can flip to any news source and read their article, and it is basically a paraphrase version of this press release. And that sucks. Like, it feels bad to just simply retype a press release.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you're releasing as your content. So, like, I get the desire for them to find more information and do digging, but I also, like, get the other side of the equation, too, of how damaging that is when the margins are so low.
Yep. And when there isn't when something gets released that's like, hey, we uncovered we got a hold of some old concept art and old story ideas for X game. The reaction is never, oh, what an interesting direction that could have taken. It's, oh, what a pity that they didn't include that. Like, the fact that in every game, there's stuff that, hey, we had this idea, we maybe iterated on it and tried to see if it would work, and ultimately decided it didn't, and that the game would be better without it, is sort of this constant part of the development process. But on the players, on like the audience side, that's always a pity. It's always, the game is always worse because they didn't include it.
We didn't get cookies.
Look at this thing that we can imagine how amazing it would be.
Yeah.
And, like, people will gleefully allow their imagination to make things seem amazing. But oftentimes, you can't find the fun.
Yeah, or even if you can, it's too expensive to do, or it doesn't make sense to do, or whatever. Like, I don't know, there's a million of these I can think of. It's like, oh, we decided that we're not going to do swimming in this game because nobody actually likes swimming, and it's hard to, and it's a pain to do, and we can spend our resources better doing other stuff. Like, well, everybody who loves swimming is now like, well, now this game feels flat and dull, and every time I walk around water, I can tell that it's designed so that it's never deeper than my knee. Like, yeah.
And the reality is, a lot of these things still do make it in games because people put in the overtime because they care about the thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing, is that this extends to the folks on the development side too, like, because nobody makes games if they don't love games. That's not a thing. People who don't love games don't last very long in the games industry, because you wind up in a position where, yeah, like, I am going to pour all of this extra effort in to put this thing in that, like, maybe nobody's going to care about and is a ton of work, but if they ever found out we chose not to put it in, they'd be mad.
I feel like my biggest frustration with players and media and everyone else is everyone seems to forget that the people that make games are people. Like, they're people with spouses and children and lives that they are stealing time from to make this game for you. And they have to exist. Like, they have to, get paid a reasonable wage, and they, need to be healthy and happy and have decent work conditions. And all of that gets lost in the mix of the angry storm that is complaining about the thing that they didn't get, or that it didn't end up the way that they imagined it.
And I mean, I realize I do my fair share of complaining, but I always trying to do it from a place of where I at least understand that this isn't personal. Like, it shouldn't be personal. They didn't kick my puppy. These are people that tried their best, and maybe it ended up a way that I didn't like. But I know, like, without a doubt, that they tried their best. They did what they thought was the best thing at the time, and it's never a, like, I hate this person because they ruined my game, because that's just silly. Like, these are people working a job in an industry that they probably grew up wanting to work in, and it's just so unfair the way we demonize individuals for things that were probably out of their control.
And on the same token, like, maybe $60 is too expensive for a game. Maybe people just can't afford to play games if they cost $60. At which point we should stop making games that won't make their money back at a price point that high. I don't know what that looks like. I hope you like mobile games.
Mobile is such an interesting topic because the other thing that I think I've been thinking about during this conversation is games have also become so much more popular over time.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a larger install base of people playing video games, and I feel like that bounty of eyeballs and dollars has not been as rapidly going back into the AAA space. It's instead finding its way into like indie or mobile games.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've seen these fascinating studies from the last few years. That's like, okay, if we statistically develop a profile of the average gamer, what is that person? And it's like, well, it's a woman in her mid to late 30s. Statistically speaking, that is the average gamer. That is certainly not who the average game is made for.
Are you sure?
Well,
because that also sounds like who the average game is made for.
It is statistically, it is not where the average spend is being put for game development. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that even with as much focus as there is in the mobile space, that being the average is still probably an underserved population compared to the incredibly overserved population that is being targeted in AAA games.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that, like, overserved is a great word for it. And, like, people don't like the implication that they're overserved, or the outright claim.
There was another conversation we had, and this is something, like, we've talked about how it feels like video games are on their way to a crash. And one of my favorite types of video games is the MMO, which I feel has already crashed.
Oh, yeah.
Because outside of keeping existing projects going, I don't know anyone developing new MMOs. Or new AAA MMOs.
Well, so, and the weird thing about that was, even when the North American market was dead for new MMOs, the South Korean market was going through their version of the Renaissance. So we could do localization to keep a fresh flow of new MMO properties coming in. That too has since crashed.
Yep.
So nobody's making them anymore. Like, it's just not a thing. And I feel like Destiny is what the new MMO looks like. And not necessarily a shooter, but that same kind of, this is mostly a multiplayer game with some character development and gear and cosmetic aspects.
It's got a really fancy lobby.
I remember...
It's a really fancy lobby.
I remember having conversations, like, while waiting for raids to kick off in WoW, where I would comment to people that either MMOs are going to learn from AAA games and pull in the things that make AAA games super great into the MMO space, into the sort of persistent, continuing MMO space, or single player game, like AAA single player games and like lobby multiplayer are going to learn from MMOs and pull all of the things that the majority of people like about MMOs into their games, and they will become the new thing. And that's what happened. Like, MMOs did not evolve fast enough. The single player games did. And they learned to do, it was like, first it was everybody does some form of multiplayer, and now and there was always competitive multiplayer, and now they've figured out how to do small group co-op, and now you've got these persistent co-op experiences in what would otherwise be a single player game with some like maybe multiplayer deathmatching. Like Destiny would have looked like, I don't know, Halo 10 years ago, and now it's picked up the things from MMOs and incorporated them, and is otherwise not that different.
MMOs also kind of forgot the things that made them so great to begin with, in some ways. Like, and I hate saying that because it sounds like, oh man, vanilla was better. I don't actually think vanilla was a better game. It's just there were some things that MMOs did that gave me a space that I don't see in other games, and I don't see them in MMOs anymore.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to figure out why, because in a lot of ways, those things died because of the MMO's financial success. And I don't know how you figure out how to provide those spaces for communities to rise and flourish that individuals can make lasting connections in.
I feel like the rise of the MMO and the MMO community went hand in hand with the rise of the internet, and now that place is Discord.
Yeah.
Like, it's not an MMO anymore, it's Discord.
Yeah, that's for true.
Or it's Twitter. And like, if you don't fit into those communities, well, sorry.
I mean, I have to admit, what was it, 2 weeks ago when they finally closed the doors of AOL Instant Messenger? I felt a little twinge of regret because, like, that was a big thing.
It's not dead yet. Just saying, we still have till December 15th.
But like,
so you feel a twinge of regret, like the entire like formation and early maintenance of the relationship that eventually became my marriage was on AOL Instant Messenger. I have some pretty strong emotions around this.
Well, and the thing is like, I would use it again, but like nobody that I talked to back then still uses it. So like that chat list is now defunct.
But yeah, we figured out ways to continue to keep in touch. I do think, I don't know how Discord is. I guess Discord's doing it well in the sense that there's a lot of open Discords.
The problem with Discord is the fact that I'm in too many Discords. Like, there are just too many different ones.
Yeah,
and
like that was the problem with forums too. You just eventually, if you were really interested in if you were community focused, you would pick one and really drive into it.
Right. And there's so much noise and so little signal. And that's the biggest problem I have with Discord right now, is like I'm in too many of them, and I don't really have a home-based Discord.
I argue that you do. It's just a Slack channel.
Well, yeah, it's just different. Like, it's not a Discord, it's a Slack.
Sure, but again, I would also argue you're not the person who has a burning need to find a community to be a part of. You are a community leader. You found your community years ago. I did too, and I love it. And I'm still I'm really involved in that community. But I'm not a person in search of a home. I've got a home. My question is, where do the people in search of a new community to join go? And I do think Discord, like, for me, I grew up with forums, and then forums led to AOL Instant Messenger, and then to World of Warcraft.
I mean, in theory, like, there are people just like me out there searching for people who need a good home.
Yeah.
And adopt them. But, like, as to whether or not someone looking for a home finds one of the people looking for a home is not that clear. Like, that's not a easy transition. And And the big problem that I have right now is we have this false sense of interaction that happens, or I guess I don't know how to even like wrap this conversation up, but it's because of the business of content generation and best practices of, you know, moderating your communities, you kind of give a false sense that you're closer to your viewers or your readers or your listeners than you really are. And I don't know, like, I mean, like, so say you're a Twitch streamer. You've got a community of people that watch you stream. Like, how many of those people are you really going to be close with instead of just acquainted enough to recognize that they're in a channel? I mean, I don't even know. Like, I'm not sure if I'm even relaying what I mean in a reasonable manner.
So what I would say with regards to that is I don't actually think the person hosting the Twitch stream, the person in the position of authority there, is the person trying to forge the relationships. It's the people who are on equal footing in that Twitch chat who are forming that community, and they're all on equal footing.
So the thing that I have noticed is it's not the people in the chat channel trying to forge a community with each other. It's the people in the chat channel that are trying to get Senpai to notice them.
I mean, I feel like everyone starts off that way, but eventually they start to notice the same names in that Twitch chat channel that are talking, trying to get Senpai to notice them, and then they start talking at each other, and then they start talking with each other.
I don't spend enough time on Twitch to know to weigh in either way on that. I do know that I am a member of a small number of relatively stable communities, but being in a bunch of relatively stable communities means I never meet new people.
Unless I drag them there.
Yeah, like I would say 100% of the new people that I speak to or 80% of the new people that I speak to on a regular basis I've met because of Bell in the last 5 years. Because there's no space. There's no space where I am comfortable community-wise to go in and try to meet new people in. I keep the relationships that I keep up with the relationships that I have and the communities that I have, but they're relatively stable. Like I don't meet new people almost ever.
It's hard. Like considering the number of people that I meet on a regular basis, it's hard to keep meeting new people and keep engaging.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I am a weird outlier in that aspect, that I'm always finding new interesting people. But I mean, admittedly, like a lot of it's from Twitter, and it's like connections to people that I already knew.
Twitter is a somewhat insane and awful service, but it's good for like finding a new person to like start following and talking at.
I don't feel like I have conversations on Twitter.
Oh, I do all the time.
I feel like I throw thoughts out into the void, and every so often somebody will throw a comment back at me, but I never feel like it's a conversation.
It all depends on the day. Sometimes I'm talking to the void, and sometimes I'm actually carrying on conversations. I'm not really sure how we ended up here from a monetization discussion, but
I mean, it was talking about a game that's a game genre that sort of lost its way and then crashed.
Yeah.
And I know we talked about like the early 80s crash, and that was kind of a result of a whole bunch of shovelware being tossed at. Too much shovelware, not enough signal, and ultimately people being sick of the value they were getting. Next crash is because there was too much good value. Like, if 2017 ends up being a harbinger of bad things in the industry, I think that's going to leave a way more lasting impact.
I mean, this isn't exactly related, but it's somewhat related. When I first entered the working world, it was during the heyday of the dot-com boom. And the town that I live in had a pretty thriving IT sector. And then the dot-com crash happened. And we were pretty heavily affected by it. There was a lot of... We weren't necessarily selling website, or we weren't necessarily like an incubator of websites, but a lot of the backbone that the internet ran on was managed by people in this town. And when the .com crash happened, people had to leave. Like, they left town. And we are still dealing with the after effects of that happening in the early 2000 era, because there just is a drought of talent.
Well, I mean, we're still dealing with the 80s crash in video games. On a similar vein, like, video games were the purview of older adults who would play together in bars. And then the 80s crash happened, and games got resurrected by Nintendo marketing to kids as a toy. And so the, like, games are for kids is something we've been shaking off for 30 years. And, like, I think we've mostly pulled off and somewhat away from that, but it still lingers depending on where you are and who you talk to. And it's 30 some years since that marketing campaign begun. Those things linger.
I mean, I feel like I'm definitely in the I has a concern phase, and it's mostly like, I think it's going to happen, I just don't know when. And I don't really know what the industry can do to stop it from happening.
I have no idea.
I mean, in all the monetization things that we are seeing is them desperately grasping at straws, trying to stave it off. And I guess, like, the trend in the industry that bothers me the most is, like, even if you do end up making a wild success of a game at a AAA studio, you're probably still going to get laid off after the game is finished. And that just feels not great.
Or you're going to want to, like, or you're going to be so burned out you just want to get out of there. Like, either way, your life is going to be disrupted by the end of a project.
Well, I kind of knew once we opened this can of worms, it would dominate any semblance of a show. I didn't necessarily realize that literally this would be the show.
This is why we didn't start it near, this time last week.
It's true.
I feel like things have kind of wound down, at least on that discussion. I don't know, like, we have a list of topics that we originally set up, but I think those were probably naive. What do we want to talk about that people just have a burning desire to talk about this week?
It almost feels anticlimactic to go into
literally
into
any of
games.
them.
Yeah, I mean,
this is a serious issue. Like, this is really a serious issue, and I feel like it's not being talked about with the level of severity that it actually is. Like, it keeps being, framed in a turn that, like, there's someone in the back room, wringing their hands and laughing maniacally as they're pocketing all this money from, microtransactions, when I think, like, in the grand scheme of things, microtransactions are a desperate plea at a life raft.
Well, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily true 100% of the time, but...
Are you saying that maybe Destiny 2 didn't need bright engrams?
See, the thing is, like, with bright engrams, those don't bother me at all, because, like, I
put those in the same category as Black Lion chests.
Well, I mean, I get lots of them for free every week. Like, I have stuff from bright engrams left and right, but, like, I didn't buy them. So that one's a weird case of, like, yes, it's monetization, but they also keep handing you the stuff.
I mean, the AAA game space, and almost willing to change that to the non-mobile game space, is trying to figure out how to continue to exist. It doesn't feel like we're talking about it like this. There's some existential problems here.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I wonder, so, like, games industry crashes, right? Like, who bothers owning a desktop computer? Those are already kind of on the way out. But one of the most cogent arguments for maintaining a desktop computer is PC gaming.
I don't know. Is VR the future?
Man, if you can't get people to pay $60 for a game people know how to make...
I don't know. Like, I feel like the fact that you really realistically need to drop $2,000 to play VR games is a pretty steep ask.
Yeah.
I was mostly being sarcastic there because
I know.
no, it's not the. I don't think it's the future, or it's not going to be the savior of games.
And like, real talk, people are going to make games. People are going to make games whatever happens to the industry. Like that's just going to continue, and we have the software, we have the skills, we have the know-how, like and we have the desire, because making games is cool. People like to make games. It might be that, you know, you're going to have maybe 1 or 2 games that come out a year that aren't on mobile, and nobody owns a PlayStation or an Xbox anymore. I mean, that's a decent ways out. Or that, like, the time between now and the next console generation might be 20 years. But it's
probably not going to be as much focus on training new game developers.
What focus on training new game developers?
Wait. When was there ever a focus on training new game developers?
Well,
I mean,
there's a for-profit industry.
There are game developer programs. There's probably a lot of those will get cut.
I mean, to be fair, the for-profit college industry is having a lot of problems right now as well.
Let me pro tip for any of our listeners who may be thinking of getting a game development degree. Please stop. Like, I don't want to burst your bubble. I don't want to be like overly down on these programs, because some very skilled people I know have gone through those programs and are excellent game designers, game developers in various forms. But if you had asked me 10 years ago if I were ever going to not be a video game designer, given the chance, I would tell you absolutely not. I'm going to do it until I die. It's the coolest thing ever. I would never stop. And when the first person I talked to told me I wouldn't be doing it forever, make sure I have something else I want to do, I didn't believe them. Nor the second, nor the third, nor the fourth, nor the fifth, nor the 10th. And here I am not making video games anymore. And I mostly was able to accomplish that because I developed a varied skill set and got a more adaptable degree than a pure game development one. Be versatile. You never know what'll happen next.
I mean, to be fair, probably the most safe option in the game development sphere is to be a programmer, because at least then you can go program something else. Because office-style programming is way easier than game development.
It's true.
I don't know. Like, I think more than anything tonight, I feel like this discussion, like, who knows if anybody will actually listen, but at least talks about something that it's a side of this discussion that's just not even brought up. And I don't know, like, I was having this discussion the other day, like, there was a period of time when I knew at least one person that was working at every major MMO studio. And over the years, like, most of them are gone. Like, there's a handful of people that are still working at the same place that they were, but the majority are just no longer in the industry for various reasons. But I think because of my ability to see that side of things, I've known this discussion was out there. But I don't think that the average gamer really knew, because nobody was talking about it. And I don't mean that in like some shocking expose kind of way. It's just there's a reality that I think everyone didn't want to know.
Well, there was that Twitter thread a little while back that was the guy talking about how he said that if it started with, like, I had a conversation with a friend where he said I wish that game developers were more open, and the response was they are, just with other game developers and not with the gaming community as a whole. And I feel like that's part of it. Like, you don't necessarily hear people talking about that because it's not, no game dev is going to go on an interview and say, I'm worried about a gaming crash. It's the kind of thing you have worried conversations about with your coworkers over drinks, or, maybe at a show like E3 or GDC when you are pretty sure nobody with a pen and paper is around.
I mean, I think it's pretty telling that when you get two developers in a room, you're going to end up with a discussion that sounds a hell of a lot like getting two veterans in a room, like, of the war. I don't know. So much of the common wisdom right now is never pre-order a game, but I would say that if you really, really, really deeply care about a game, you should probably pre-order. You should definitely at least buy it in the first week.
This is back to that point, like the behaviors that are encouraged are not necessarily like what's optimal for the game is not necessarily optimal for the individual. We have a whole bunch of different actors playing here, and we don't know how to square these circles.
Yeah, because I mean, me pre-ordering games that I know I like or just want to support, I mean, makes me sleep better at night, but it's not going to save the industry.
Yeah, I'm quickly getting to the point where I'm not sure what else to add to the discussion.
I just like it's super downer, but like I'm
bummed now.
Don't know how a market like this, like I don't know how to correct this. I don't know if there's like precedent for stuff like this correcting itself, other than like a crash happens and out of the crash something new happens.
That is the precedent we have right now.
That is the precedent we have. So looks like we're heading towards a crash right now. I guess we let it happen and hope something sweet comes out of it. Last time we got Nintendo, we lost like a whole bunch of stuff, but it's hard.
I don't know. I don't have anything. I don't have anything to really. My own personal philosophy on this is just always embrace change because it's inevitable. But yeah, you don't know what's coming next.
Enjoy what you got while you got it.
Yep. And be ready to enjoy something new, because new might be what you get from now on.
I feel like that might be a reasonable note to end it on.
Yep.
Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the show, at least somewhat, some of the perspectives we brought up, and hopefully we did not bum you out eternally. I promise next week we'll be probably more, upbeat as we discuss Divinity Original Sin 2.
That's not next week.
That's not next week?
No.
Okay, I thought it was next week.
Nope.
Anyway, ignore me. We'll have another normal show, and we will discuss the things that we had on our list that we didn't get around to discussing.
Plus also some more things.
Some more things, yeah. Anyway.
This is going to be our new podcast thing, is we have all of these things that we were going to discuss this week. We discussed them next week, and then we're like, well, I guess we had a whole bunch of stuff that we were going to discuss, but didn't get to it, so let's push it out a week.
Works for me. Saves me the effort of trying to come up with stuff that we're going to talk about. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week. Good night.
Good night.
See ya.
Good night.